All right, we are back for our final presentation according to my agenda. Uh, so let's go ahead and get this one done. Who's taking on this one?
These folks right here.
Oh, here we go. Dave Urban, the team.
Not Dave Erb's team. This is the team. So just a couple things before I get started. One, we got to work on presentation order here because coming up after the drones and then coming up after Stacy just is not going to cut it. Anyway, I'm joined here with Marichelle and Ashley. You know them. You've seen them. You love them. We've tag team on this. We love this presentation. We are just so happy that we didn't get pushed to workshop like last year. So we made the cut. We're at the big kids table. So as this title slide shows, it's an economic outlook. It's a very high level. It's intended to give you a sense of where we're at, where things are at in the economy as we head into making decisions like funding parks and different things. Before I get started, I just want to say that after listening to all the presentations today, it wasn't, you don't have to go far to find out the why you do things here. We've got so much stuff that's going on. Economic development efforts, public safety, infrastructure, parks, community needs at Sten City, our vision, amazing stuff. So it makes my job and it makes it a lot more enjoyable for me to come in and do what I do. So thank you for that. All right, let's move on. Okay, so we're going to be covering a couple things today, economic indicators, demographics, and budgetary and finance. So we're each going to have a hand in that. We've prepared an economic development outlook presentation for council, providing an overview of key economic indicators, city demographics, and budgetary and financial data. We hope that this offers valuable context. So as we're making decisions about what we're going to fund or decision that council makes, hopefully we can kind of put a baseline together for you all with that. So I'm going to cover the next three slides over economic indicators, and what I'm hoping to do is provide a broad overview of some economic indicators that will help provide some forecast revenue responsibility so we can be responsible in the forecasts that we make, keeping pace with growth. We've got a lot of things out there like our utility systems that a lot of their demand is driven by growth. So how do we address that? How we manage risk, how we maintain fiscal sustainability, which we think is key, and defend our budget decisions. So as we make decisions about our budget moving forward, we're hoping that this information will help provide that. So for the first bullet point regarding economic uncertainty, which I thought was interesting because Stacy, that was one of the last bullet points on her slide, talked about economic uncertainty, and it surely is true. We have a lot of that right now. Councilmember Kelly talked about the division that's out there, and you see that. We've got tax policy issues, changes with the Fed that are coming. We got a government shutdown. All those things are impacting us, and while specifically it's not impacting what we're doing, there's a trickle down, and a lot of that relates to our consumer confidence, and right now that's below the typical average, and where that impacts us is softening in the spending, and we're not seeing sales tax dollars, and Ashley's going to speak to the softening of our sales tax revenue year over year. So again, that economic uncertainty does impact us, and the importance that I want to take out of this is that we've got a history of conservative assumptions and our planning, and we should maintain that moving forward. Regarding inflation and core pressures that we have on our budget, inflation remains in pockets, and primarily you'll see that with the cities with our construction and our construction projects, and we've seen some pricing bids come in for projects that are significantly higher than engineer estimates, so that's a constant battle. So while there has been some tapering off of the interest rates, we're still getting hit in certain pockets. In fact, for construction projects over the last about 4.5 years, average construction costs have gone up over 34%. So that's quite a third in a 4-year period. So again, that's the challenges that are in front of the engineering team, public services, and any other capital projects that we have out there. Lastly, regarding interest rates and debt affordability, we have some needs that you saw earlier from the infrastructure presentation, that our reliance on debt is going to be there for the next few years. So interest rates will have an impact on that. Obviously, it's the overall cost of borrowing, and the cheaper that is, the more that we're able to do. A couple things that I just want to point out is maintaining those strong bond ratings is helping us return those low rates that we've received. And for fiscal year 25, we issued bonds for general obligation in water and sewer, and we had interest rates of 3.6 and 3.9%, which is fairly low. We might see a little dip in this year's issues that are going to be coming up in May and June, but we'll know a little bit more in a few months on that. Regarding revenue stability and diversification, it starts with good diversification. We've got a very diversified revenue base, so during an economic downturn, we can weather those downturns pretty well. We don't have a reliance on a single source of revenue. You've seen that third, where we have a third property tax, third sales tax, and third other that drive our general fund, and I think that served us real well. I think, again, just emphasizing the conservative approach to revenue forecasting is really important. Regarding our property value growth and tax base trends, our growth continues, but albeit a little bit slower. We've had a tapering off of some of the growth that we've seen in the previous few years. A little bit later in the slide or in the presentation, we're going to have a chart that'll show that to you. Our new growth remains strong. That's one positive development that we see coming out of planning and economic development efforts. That new growth that is on the tax rolls that's added every year has been pretty significant, and we would expect some of that to continue, but that's been something that's been really helpful. And again, we have a diversified property tax base as well, where we've got the burden is spread across the residential, commercial, industrial pockets. So there's not one particular classification of property that is burdened more so than the others. You will hear a little bit about House Bill 9, which changes the exemption levels for business personal property. That is one thing that actually would shift some of the burden from businesses to residential. So Ashley's going to speak to that in a little bit. For labor markets and workforce costs, the labor market is still fairly competitive. It persists, and but the city's done a lot to address that with addressing the compensation and our approach to hiring. The current vacancy rate for the city is 3.5%. I think that's probably the lowest that we've seen in quite some time, and kudos to the HR team for making that happen. Regarding capital needs, you saw a presentation that we did earlier that identified large capital needs that we have in the next 10 years. A lot of that is driven by the age of the assets and the growth. Again, I just want to reiterate, we're grateful for the bond election that passed that provides us the funds that we're able to support that capital program. One thing we need to be aware of is that as we move forward and issue the debt, that it could have an impact on our ratings. We've done a number of things to manage that, to maintain those ratings, but done smartly, I think we can continue to maintain those ratings that we've had in the past. And then lastly, financial resilience. Continued reserve plan. We've got policies in place that help us make decisions, that guides our decisions. Right now, our general fund balance level is almost 36%. policy level, just as a reminder, is 20%, so we're almost double that. So again, that's one of the things that really drives our ratings and provides a lot of flexibility for decisions for the future. And with that, I'll turn it over to Marichelle.
Okay, so we're going to talk about some trends for 2025. So we'll start off with multifamily rental rates. So the rental rates for 2025 were basically between $1.78 and then went down to $1.72 by the end of 25. And you can see that the occupancy rate was over 90% as well. The vacancy rate for 25 was 8.5%, which is lower than what it was the previous year. So we're seeing less of a vacancy rate compared to the previous years as well. And so for office space, you'll see that we have about 44 million square feet of inventory. In 2025, we had about 220,000 square feet under construction. And then the average occupancy rate was about 77%. Over the coming years, the trend shows that we'll kind of go back a little bit up to closer to 80%, around 81%. But when you look at the vacancy rate for Lewisville compared to the broader DFW area, we're doing about 2% better than the overall DFW area. And then rents increased by about 1.5% in 2025, but then again, compared to the Metroplex, it went up by 1.8%. So industrial space, so we have about 20 million in inventory. Our vacancy rate increased slightly by about 2% compared to the previous year. Our occupancy rate is still doing pretty well. We're about between 93 and 95%. And then the trend shows that we're going to probably dip down into the closer to 90%, but then we're going to go back up a little bit. And then we are still showing that we are squarely in the middle. So the cities listed there are 18 cities, including Lewisville, and we are number 9. So we are squarely in the middle there. Okay, so for retail trends in 2025, the occupancy rate was about 92-93%, and the forecast shows that it will remain right around there, just a little bit above 90% over the coming years. And our current inventory is at about 11 million square feet. And so the majority of Lewisville is in what is called the Lewisville submarket, the Lewisville retail submarket, and it includes 19 million square feet of space. And then you'll see the cities listed there that it includes, and this is the information that we pull off of CoStar. So on the next slide, I will show you that. So Castle Hills actually falls into a different submarket, and that's just due to how CoStar does their analytics and what they base it off of. So compared to, so Castle Hills is in the North Carrollton retail submarket, and then you can see the difference there between the two. The Lewisville retail submarket, again, being the biggest retail submarket in the North Texas. It has about 9 million more in square feet in inventory compared to the North Carrollton retail submarket, and then the vacancy rate for Lewisville is slightly higher. And then you can see there which cities are incorporated in the North Carrollton retail submarket. Okay, so then we're going to move on to some demographics. So our population here shows 137, but we have more updated numbers from the COG, which for 2025 was showing 140,880. So between 24 and 25, we saw an increase of 3,565. And then the median household income increased as well. It increased by about 3,500. For modes, transportation to work, public transportation and bike to work remain the same, and there were just slight differences for carpooling and walk to work. The decrease in walk to work was just by 0.1%, and the carpool decreased from 11% to 9.9%. The annual spending per household remained the same as well as the top 3 spending categories of apparel, healthcare, and entertainment. And then the daytime population also increased slightly by 1,166. And then this slide just shows the workforce in Lewisville, so the percentage of blue, white collar, and service jobs, and then you see the majority of the jobs in Lewisville are white collar jobs at that 67%, and then the top 3 industries is the retail trade, healthcare, and then professional and tech as well. Then I'll turn it back over to Dave.
Thank you. So we have a chart and a graph here. On the left-hand side, we're showing the assessed value growth of the city from 2021 through 2025. And prior to this 5-year period, we had an 8-year period where growth had been steady between 5% and 9%. You can see in the last 5 years, we've had a lot more volatility, and there's a number of drivers around that. For tax year 21, we're just coming out of COVID. And you can see the lower than typical growth that we had for the year. And then in November of 21, we annexed Castle Hills, and we also started seeing some strong growth in the market. So we picked up almost 40% of value in that single year. The following year, again, strong growth across the board. We saw 11% growth. After that, things started slowing down. I think we had a mixture there of some strong growth on the residential side, but not so strong on the commercial industrial side, so that tempered the growth for the year. And then most recently for 2025, things seem to have leveled off. On the right-hand side is the chart of the new growth that I had mentioned earlier, where prior to 2022, we averaged about $250 million of new growth every year. So in 2023 and 2024, you saw where it spikes up to $720 million and $780 million, and that's just the timing of the projects of when property came on the rolls. We saw a slight drop in 2025. I would anticipate still strong growth into the future, knowing the projects that are currently under construction and probably going to be hitting on the rolls over the next couple of years. We should see some steady new value growth into the future. This next table and chart shows the single-family assessed value growth. Again, single-family residences account for about 50% of the total property values in the city. On the left-hand side, the table shows the average property value and the median property value. Previously, we had maintained averages and presented that information to council. For the last couple of years, we've added the median value just as a comparison, and after we get some good history with median, we'll drop off the average. You can see from the chart that we saw some significant growth in 22 through 24 in the single-family homes. And although we don't have that information on the medians, I would anticipate that we also saw that same growth there, but just not to the extent as the average home. On the right-hand side, this table just is a visual of the data that's on the chart that shows the average single-family home growth year over year, and then the orange line is the percent growth year over year.
So Dave and I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about some property tax legislation that was passed. House Bill 9, it's also House Joint Resolution 1, that took effect in January after voters approved it back in November. This is probably going to be one of the most important structural changes to our property tax rate coming up. And essentially what this bill does is it allows businesses to exempt up to $125,000 of business personal property compared to the old exemption of $2,500. What this means for Lewisville is a couple different things. The most immediate impact will be in our FY27 budget. What this is going to do is it's going to trigger a one-time increase in our no new revenue rate and our voter approval rate. And we'll show you an illustration of that on the next slide here. And the reason for that is because we're allowed to take into account that lower tax base when we calculate those rates. So what that's going to mean for us going into FY27 is it's actually going to allow for a little bit of additional revenue that we wouldn't have seen otherwise. But then in subsequent years, we're going to have some real pressures on maintaining our service levels. So this is something that you're going to hear us talk about again at this workshop and then in subsequent years as well. One thing we did want to mention here is that maintaining our current tax rate, which we've got on the screen here, it's that 41.9 cents, will likely not be viable under this new framework because we are going to have a reduction in revenue if we maintain that rate due to that reduction in our tax base. So we're going to bring some options to City Council where we're going to discuss, potentially adopting a rate close to or at that voter approval rate in order to preserve those funding levels. So last summer when this legislation came out, Dave and I did an exercise to apply that legislation to our tax year 2024 values. So had this legislation been in place when we were using these values to calculate our tax rate, what would the impact have been at that time? We've got this chart here that shows you the original 2024 tax rates that we presented to council. So you see the three different options here, the no new revenue rate, voter approval rate, and that voter approval rate plus unused increment. Had this legislation been in place at the time, the revised 2024 tax rates are on the right-hand side. Every single one of those is an increase in the rate. So that's what would have generated that additional revenue. Again, had this been in place at the time with our general fund revenues, the original amount was $58.3 million. This would have generated about $900,000 in additional revenue. While this is nice, again, this is going to apply significant pressure on us moving forward in future years. One thing I know that Dave mentioned earlier, but I want to call out again, is that what this is going to do is it's going to shift that property tax burden towards our residents. So now that we have that higher exemption on the business personal property side, our residents are going to bear the brunt of this a little bit more than they have in the past. And again, that new exemption is essentially going to be shrinking our taxable base moving forward. The tax year 2024 reduction in taxable assessed value is about $210 million.
Okay, it is what it is, I guess. One of the ways to combat this, I would think, would be homestead exemptions for residents. So you can have a higher tax rate, but have a homestead exemption for residents. Is there any thought to that? Any opinions on that? 'Cause that tends to shift the tax burden back over to businesses.
Yes, but you would still be looking at a reduced taxable base in that instance
Sure,
as well.
no, I understand. Just wonder if we can start
But
moving
yes.
that. If Boston's going to move the ball one way, can we do something to move the ball back the other direction?
That's correct.
Okay.
Just to add to that, we probably had more flexibility when the cap was at 8% versus the 3.5%. So our hands are kind of tied going into that.
Mm-hmm.
And also, when we made that change, or when the state legislature made the change to go from 8 to 3.5, there were some decisions that the council made at the time about maintaining the rate or taking it up to the voter approval rate. And anticipating the future cap at 3.5%, council made the decision to levy at the voter approval rate and go a little bit higher than we typically would have been, just in anticipation of the tightening of the tax levy in future years. So I always like to throw this information out. These are our bond rating considerations. Each year we issue debt and we get ratings opinions from Fitch and Standard & Poor's rating agencies. And for the longest time, we were AAA across the board. We are still primarily AAA as an organization. Standard & Poor's rates the city AAA both for our GO bonds and for our revenue bonds. Fitch has us AAA rated for the revenue bonds and a AA plus for our general obligations, which is interesting because typically it's more difficult to get a AAA rating on a revenue bond than it is for the GO side. Interesting note, in discussion with Fish last year about our rating, if you remember 2 years ago, although we hadn't made any changes to our methodologies or how we managed our money, in fact, our reserves had been growing, we saw a decrease in our rating from AAA to AA plus. Fitch even noted in the first line of their opinion that there's nothing that we did that caused the decline. It was a change in their methodology that caused that. Well, 2 years later, they're giving us indications that although we make no changes from what we did 2 years ago or last year, that we could see an increase in our rating. Now, I don't want to guarantee that, but that was just coming from Fitch themselves, so I just thought it was interesting that they had shared that with us. Again, important to maintain that bond rating. It returns the best rates that you can get in the market for when you issue bonds, and we're going to be heading out to the market probably in the next 60 to 90 days to issue some general obligation and revenue bonds.
I did just want to take a moment on this slide here. Earlier, when we were outside watching the drone demo, I mentioned to Chris Torres, our budget analyst, man, it'd be really cool to demo the budget somehow. And he made a comment that he said, well, I could make the case that this is all demonstrating the budget. And I said that was the best possible answer he could have given at that moment. And I think you've seen that today through all the videos, all the really nice images, the things that we really want to do, but also the accomplishments video at the beginning of today. We really do want to make sure that we're using all of our available funding sources to get these initiatives accomplished. And I think we've been very creative. I like to view the budget as a puzzle, right? What are the puzzle pieces that we can use? How can we get creative? How can we phase this in moving forward? And so the rest of this presentation is really going to talk about where we're at this year in terms of our major revenues, the trends that we're seeing, and then we're also going to talk a little bit about the budget calendar and the upcoming budget season. Starting out with sales tax, this is probably our biggest economic indicator. This is as close to real time as we can get. There is a 2-month lag in our sales tax data. So the February collections that we just got in, that was for December's holiday spending. But again, this gives us a really good indicator of that level of flexible spending in our community. Fiscal year 2025 actuals for sales tax in our general fund came in about $690,000 over the prior year. This is an increase of 1.6%. And I mention that because the chart in the upper right-hand corner shows you that percent change from the prior year. All of these numbers are positive. That means we are continuing to see increases in our sales tax revenue. But if you take out that outlier right there in FY 21 that's related to Castle Hills, you can see there's a trend here. These increases are getting less and less each year. We started talking about this last year with the flattening of this revenue source. We are seeing that this year. So our projections are coming true, and that's something that we really need to be cognizant of moving forward in terms of continuing to diversify our revenue sources, those sorts of things. We also have a sales tax audit firm that Dave and I work with on a regular basis. They are constantly monitoring audits at the Texas Comptroller's office just to see if that will impact our revenue collections. Sometimes that might mean we get in more revenue than we were previously. Sometimes that might mean we get in less, and that tends to happen when we have issues over our bordering cities, that sort of thing. Then I also wanted to talk about building permits. Just as a reminder, our projections for building permits are not based off of an average or anything like that. It's based off of real projects that we know are in the pipeline that we expect to request building permits in the near future. For fiscal year 2025, our actuals ended the year slightly less than the prior year, but again, this is all based on projects that are actually happening. We came in $692,000 more than the adopted budget, so we actually ended up in good shape last year when it came to building permits. We have a couple of major projects scheduled this year as well, including Lakeside Crossing and a multifamily project out in the Castle Hills area of Lewisville. As of February, actually as of a few days ago, our fiscal year 26 actuals are in good shape. Again, we're already at $690,000, and our budget this year is $1.3 million. And also on this slide, I'd like to mention that Castle Hills outlier fiscal year 2022, that large spike is due to those Castle Hills permits, so would not expect to see that kind of revenue in future years. Then I wanted to take an opportunity to talk about our tourism dollars. So we've heard a lot about that today. Our hotel occupancy tax is the source of these dollars. When we talk about how last year ended up, fiscal year 2025 actuals came in about 63,000 lower than the prior year. We actually saw a slight drop in demand. That is the chart in the upper left-hand corner here. You can see fiscal year 24 is that beige color, fiscal year 25 is the dark blue, and then fiscal year 26, we're actually tracking along with fiscal year 24's demand almost to a T. So yes, we did see a slight drop in demand last year, but we're right back up this year. And then I also wanted to talk about our occupancy rates, which is the chart in the upper right-hand corner. Prior to COVID, our occupancy rates were hovering around 68, 69%. We saw a dip during COVID. We bounced back. We had a really good couple of years in fiscal year 22 and 23, and now we're kind of back down in that upper 60s range. One thing I did want to mention is that last year we actually had new hotel rooms come online. And so when our demand doesn't change, but we bring on additional hotel rooms, that depresses that occupancy rate. So just wanted to mention that we did have a slower January than usual, but we'll keep an eye on those as we go throughout the year. And then one other thing that I wanted to mention is that in August 2024, we started collecting hotel occupancy taxes from our short-term rentals. In fiscal year 25, that made up about 5% of that revenue source. And then as just a reminder, when we budget our revenues, we budget based on what we know we're going to have on a recurring basis. We don't want to plan on any one-time outliers. We want to make sure that we're budgeting, again, conservatively for those ongoing expenses. So for that reason, we didn't budget any additional hotel occupancy taxes for any dollars that the FIFA World Cup matches might bring in. Same thing on the sales tax side. We've spent a lot of time today talking about the utility fund. The chart that you see here are actuals across the entire utility fund. So two main sources of revenue there, water sales and sewer service, right? We heard Chris Eckert talk about that earlier today. But we also have a few other smaller revenues in here as well. We have our capital recovery fees, those are also known as impact fees, and then a few other miscellaneous charges. Last year for fiscal year 25, we ended the year at about 57.7 million, which is an increase over the prior year. Fiscal year 2024 was a very rainy year, which reduces water consumption. So despite the rate increases that we've applied the last few years, we did see a decrease in revenue in fiscal year 24, but we jumped right back up in fiscal year 25. This year, we're looking strong already. Last year at this time, our revenues were about 17 million. This year, we're looking at 21 million. And again, we have major capital investment needs in the upcoming years. So you will hear this again at Budget Workshop. We will bring a budget back to you with rate options for both water and sewer and drainage. And then again, I just wanted to remind council that we do have a long-range water and sewer plan that Dave and I are constantly meeting with public services on. We want to make sure that we're smoothing out those projects. We want to make sure that they're actually, we have the capacity to handle those projects and that we're being cognizant of the impact that this has on our residents.
Okay, real quick, I touched on this earlier in the presentation that last year during budget workshop, we provided council with the 5-year plan, the rate study that we did with New Gen. We currently have an update to that plan, but I just wanted to, as a reminder, the rate increases that were part of that plan last year, 7.4% was actually what was included in this year's rate increase. Next year's would have been anticipated 8.8, and then going up to 11.8 in 2029, and then for fiscal year 30 dropping back down to 6.4%. We're currently working on that study, and we would anticipate having that done, some preliminary information in the next couple months to share with council. That very bottom statement there that talks about smoothing rate increases, minimizing customer impacts. We're very aware of affordability. I just want to remind council that if you remember the survey that we do with our comparable cities, we're typically in that lower quartile as far as total monthly cost for water and sewer service. And again, even with these larger rate increases moving out, we've always managed to stay in that lower quartile. So again, we're going to balance affordability with need when we're making decisions or recommendations for rate increases moving forward. We're also doing a stormwater rate study. We haven't done this in several years. It's currently at $7 per month per household, and there's an equivalent rate for non-residential properties. That $7 a month generates approximately $6 million towards new stormwater capital projects. That's in addition to about $26.6 million that we have in the stormwater fund that's available for projects. Now that sounds like a lot of funds, and it really is, but the amount of outstanding projects that was provided to us, and it's about a year old, so it'll get updated with the the stormwater rate study update, was $110 million. So again, there's still demand there and the need for this fee, and a number of projects that are still outstanding. Again, this and the water rate study results will be shared with council at the budget workshop in August.
So we did want to throw in a few non-financial metrics to this presentation as part of the Project Smarter initiative that you heard Claire talk about earlier today. We're really trying to bring in metrics that the city is already tracking into our decision making. And these are just 3 of them that we thought would give you insight into Lewisville specific economic indicators. The first one in the upper right-hand corner is all permits issued. So this is new construction, this is alterations, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, all of those permits. All 3 of these charts actually show you how we're doing this year compared to last year. All 3 of them indicate we have slightly less activity than the prior year. I did want to talk about the number of engineering site plans a little bit. I wanted to compare this to prior years just to see if that gap that you see in January and February is an outlier or if it's something that we would normally expect around this time. And if we were looking at fiscal year 24, we actually had 2 site plans in January and then 6 in February. So fiscal year 25 was a bit of an outlier, but then when you look at what's happened this year, we had 1 in January and 0 in February. So again, we are seeing a little bit less activity there than we're used to. And this metric really, this one and our pre-development meetings, that shows us what our future is looking like in terms of development. Number of pre-development meetings scheduled. Again, we're just seeing a little bit less activity than last year. I say all of that, this was anticipated going into the fiscal year 26 budget. We expected to see a little bit of a slowdown. We budgeted for this accordingly. We did go ahead and reduce our revenues just to, again, be conservative. And so we are seeing business progress exactly as we expected.
So this slide was a late add to the presentation. We recently completed our actuarial valuation for the OPEB plan. And if you remember, last year we brought the council at retreat recommendation for a change in the subsidy for retiree health. And we just want to provide you the positive valuation that came back from OPEB and just how well the plan has worked up to now. So just a little background, why the change was recommended. Under the prior program, only the longer tenure employees were able to benefit from the plan. It became too cost prohibitive if you didn't have that longer tenure here. So we ended up not having a lot of retirees on the plan, and the ones that were had higher cost experiences which were driving the monthly premium up, and it made it unaffordable for most. So what we brought to council was a recommendation to move to a subsidy surcharge system, which also recognize not only the shorter or longer tenured employees, but also the shorter tenured employees as well. One of the major changes that we made was to blend the rates with the larger population of the active employees rather than isolating the retirees by themselves, which normally or typically have a higher level of experience. So what that was able to do was have a more blended rate, made it more affordable, and then on top of that, with a surcharge or a subsidy, it made it completely affordable for even those that have 10 or 15 years of experience with the city when they retire, that they would be able to access the retiree health. So with the annual audit, we prepare the OPEB valuation. And like I said, Lewis and Ellis prepared that. You heard Bonnie Albritton speak to you last year when we presented this program. Well, the results, we had anticipated an actuarial determined contribution, the ADC, of about $928,000 annually, or at least first year, and a funded level of 90.5%. Our actual ADC for first year is $837,680, and we're actually funded at 105%. Now, there's a number of things that come into that. First is the commitment that council made to fund that. If you remember, there was a series of transfers that we made from various funds into the OPEB fund. $9.7 million went into that fund. That plus some strong interest earnings above assumptions and experience that came in better, all kind of weighed on top of one another, resulted in that. So where we were hoping to get to 100% funded over a number of years, we were actually able to do that in the first year. So what that did is it saved us about $90,000 in what we expected to be paying on an annual basis for that ADC, and we're completely funded. So a bit of good news, wanted to share it with council, and this is how, when you put together a plan, you get council support, and you actually action on that plan, these are the results, and we're really excited to be able to offer this plan, carrying on that philosophy that we have for about valuing, serving, and building with our employees into retirement. So.
All right, we're in the last portion of today's presentation. So every year at Retreat, we do bring two options for the budget calendar to you for discussion. The budget calendar is based on state law and our regularly scheduled city council meetings. Depending on whether we call for a tax rate election, we have various deadlines that we have to meet. The first version is our standard budget calendar. This is if we were to proceed without the option of an election. On July 25th or before, we would get our certified tax rolls from the Central Appraisal District. This past year, we actually got it a couple of days ahead of time, so it gave Dave and I a little bit of wiggle room there. Then on August 3rd, we would submit the preliminary budget to City Council during that regular session. That week, we would then have our one-on-one meetings with each of you leading up to budget workshop. This is an opportunity for you to ask us any questions and for us to just give you a sneak peek at what you'll see during budget workshop, which this year would occur on Saturday, August 8th. That would be a special session, just like usual. On August 27th, we would then publish the notice of public hearing for that budget. That has to occur at least 10 days prior to the public hearing. And then at the beginning of September, we would then have to publish the notice of public hearing on the tax rate. The first city council meeting we'll have in September will be September 14th. That's when we'll hold the public hearing and the vote on the budget. Again, we can't hold the public hearing on the budget the same day as the vote on the tax rate. So that's why we split these up into the two meetings in September. Our second meeting would be September 21st. That's when we would do the public hearing and the vote on the tax rate. This is the option if we were to proceed with the option for an election. As you can see here, everything gets shifted up by about a month. We would actually have to submit the preliminary budget early, July 6th, during that regular session. I mention this because there's a 30-day window. We have to submit this preliminary budget at least 30 days prior to council voting on the tax rate. That has to happen on August 17th in this scenario. So if we were to push this to the July 20th meeting, that would be too late. So what this would mean is we're submitting the preliminary budget before we receive certified tax rolls on July 25th. That date doesn't change no matter what option we go with today. So we would still get those certified tax rolls around July 25th. Then immediately following that, starting on July 27th, we would begin having our one-on-one meetings with City Council. Under this scenario, we would have our budget workshop on July 31st. That is a Friday, not a Saturday. And the reason for that is because we would then have to publish notice of our public hearing immediately. We would have to contact the newspaper that day in order for it to be published 2 business days later, which would be on August 4th. Then on August 10th, we would have to publish our notice of public hearing on the tax rate. That has to happen at least 5 days prior to the public hearing, but we also have to publish this on our website 7 days before the hearing. So we really use that 7-day mark there. Then we would have our special session on August 14th in order to have our public hearing and the vote on the budget. And again, we can't hold that public hearing the same day as the vote on the tax rate. So then just a few days later on Monday, August 17th, this would be during a regular session, we would then have the public hearing and the vote on the tax rate. This date is really important. It would also be the deadline to call for that tax rate election. So if we were to proceed with this option, that would be a big agenda for us.
I like y'all. I don't like you that much. That's a lot of meetings in a very short period of time.
That election would not be until November, right? Which would be a month after we start our new fiscal year. So this is really, how would we even do that? I mean, it's really not even an option. I think the state knew that.
We would have to prepare 2 budgets. One that assumed the election was successful and one that assumed it was not.
That's government efficiency. Thank you, state of Texas.
Do y'all need a consensus from us now?
We do have a staff recommendation for you. So again, Dave mentioned earlier, we are expecting to see our property tax revenue continue to increase. We are seeing increased development. We're seeing increased property values. We're still seeing our other major revenue sources continue to increase as well, albeit at a slower pace than in the past. And again, when we bring that budget to you, we'll have options for our utility rates to help fund some of those capital projects. And then, as always, we'll continue to monitor inflation, we'll continue to monitor interest rates, and we'll evaluate our fee schedule. We do that every year. We want to make sure that the fees that we're charging for services are appropriate, that we're recovering our costs. Obviously, we don't want to overcharge, but we do want to make sure that we're recovering our costs. When we talk about that diversification of revenue sources, this is what we're referring to. So again, we will place scrutiny on every fee on our fee schedule going into this budget season as well. So based on these economic trends and just our operational priorities, our recommendation is to proceed without the option of an election for fiscal year 27.
Obviously, we don't need a vote, just wanted
No,
to see if
just-
there's any other concerns about that.
Not at this time,
Okay.
unless something significantly changes in projections.